Joseph Stalin had spent years building influence behind the scenes. But after Vladimir Lenin's death in January 1924, everything changed. The Soviet Union had lost its founding leader, and no clear successor had been chosen. Many believed Leon Trotsky, one of the heroes of the Russian Revolution and the Civil War, would naturally take control. Trotsky was widely respected, an exceptional speaker, and an experienced military commander. Compared to him, Stalin appeared quiet, reserved, and far less charismatic. To many observers, he seemed like an unlikely candidate, but appearances were deceiving. While other communist leaders focused on public speeches and ideological debates, Stalin focused on relationships, strategy, and organization. As General Secretary of the Communist Party, he had spent years appointing loyal officials across the country. Every appointment strengthened his influence. Every new supporter increased his political power. Many of his rivals underestimated how important these connections would become. Instead of confronting his opponents all at once, Stalin moved carefully. He formed temporary alliances with different leaders whenever it benefited him. Once a political rival lost influence, Stalin quietly shifted his support elsewhere. One by one, the people who stood in his way found themselves isolated from the centers of power. By the late 1920s, Stalin had emerged as the dominant figure inside the Communist Party. Leon Trotsky, once considered Lenin's most likely successor, was expelled from the party, forced into exile, and eventually left the Soviet Union. Years later, Trotsky was assassinated in Mexico in 1940 by an agent connected to Soviet intelligence. Historians continue to examine the Soviet leadership's role in that assassination, but by then, Stalin's position as the country's unquestioned leader had already been firmly established. Now that he held power, Stalin believed the Soviet Union had to modernize at an extraordinary speed. He feared that if the country remained economically weak, foreign powers might invade and destroy it. His solution was rapid industrialization on a scale the world had never seen. Factories began appearing across the Soviet Union, massive steel plants, coal mines, hydroelectric dams, railroads, and manufacturing centers were built in only a few years. Cities expanded rapidly as millions of people moved from rural villages to industrial centers in search of work. The government introduced a series of economic programs known as the 5-year plans. These plans established ambitious production goals for steel, coal, machinery, electricity, and other essential industries. Local officials were expected to meet or exceed these targets, and success was celebrated as proof that socialism was transforming the country into a modern industrial power. Industrial production increased dramatically during this period. New factories supplied equipment for construction, transportation, and eventually military expansion. Within a relatively short time, the Soviet Union became one of the world's leading industrial nations. However, these achievements came with enormous human costs. Workers often endured extremely long hours under difficult conditions. Safety standards were limited. Housing shortages were common, and intense pressure to meet production quotas created constant stress throughout the workforce. Missing targets could damage careers, while exceeding them often brought public recognition and rewards. At the same time, Stalin introduced one of the most controversial policies in Soviet history: collectivization. For generations, millions of Soviet families had farmed their own land. Stalin argued that individual farming was inefficient and prevented the country from producing enough food for its growing population and expanding industries. The government therefore ordered farmers to join large, state-controlled collective farms. Many farmers resisted giving up their land, livestock, and equipment. Some destroyed crops rather than surrender them. Others slaughtered their own animals before government officials could confiscate them. The Soviet government responded with increasing force. Those accused of resisting collectivization, particularly wealthier peasants, labeled as kulaks, faced arrests, deportations, or confiscation of their property. Entire families were relocated to remote parts of the Soviet Union under harsh conditions. The disruption caused by collectivization, combined with poor harvests, unrealistic grain quotas, and administrative failures, contributed to severe famines in several regions during the early 1932s. Millions of people experienced extreme hunger, and historians estimate that millions died, although exact figures remain debated among scholars. Despite these tragedies, Stalin refused to abandon his policies. He believed rapid modernization was essential for the country's survival, even if the cost was extraordinarily high. As the economy transformed, Stalin became increasingly concerned about political opposition. He trusted very few people. Even longtime allies could suddenly become suspects. He believed enemies might exist not only outside the Soviet Union, but also within the Communist Party itself. This growing suspicion would soon shape one of the darkest chapters of his rule. As Stalin tightened his grip on power, fear gradually became one of the most powerful tools of his government. He believed that any sign of opposition, whether real or imagined, could threaten the future of the Soviet Union over time. Suspicion spread throughout the Communist Party, the military, and even ordinary society. Friends became cautious when speaking to one another. Neighbors worried that a careless conversation might be reported to the authorities. Trust slowly disappeared from everyday life. During the mid to late 1932s, the Soviet Union entered a period that historians now refer to as the Great Purge, also known as the Great Terror. Stalin and other Soviet leaders claimed that hidden enemies were working to destroy the government from within. As a result, thousands of party officials, military officers, intellectuals, engineers, and ordinary citizens were investigated on accusations of espionage, sabotage, or plotting against the state. Many of these accusations remain highly controversial among historians. While some cases involved genuine political conflicts, many others are widely believed to have relied on forced confessions, limited evidence, or unfair legal proceedings. Large public trials were organized in Moscow, where several prominent communist leaders admitted to crimes after long periods of imprisonment and interrogation. These events became known as the Moscow show trials. At the same time, the Soviet secret police, known as the NKVD, expanded its operations across the country. Officers carried out arrests during both day and night. Families sometimes woke to loud knocks on their doors, uncertain whether a loved one would ever return. The atmosphere of fear affected nearly every part of Soviet society. Many prisoners were sent to a vast network of forced labor camps, known as the Gulag. These camps were located in some of the coldest and most remote regions of the Soviet Union, including Siberia and the Arctic. Prisoners worked on railroads, canals, mines, forests, and large construction projects under extremely difficult conditions. Harsh weather, food shortages, disease, and exhausting labor claimed countless lives over the years. Historians continue to debate the exact number of people imprisoned or killed during Stalin's rule because Soviet records were incomplete, secret, or later destroyed. However, there is broad agreement among scholars that millions of people passed through the Gulag system, and many never returned home. One of the most surprising consequences of the Great Purge was its effect on the Soviet military. Many experienced officers, including some of the country's most respected commanders, were arrested or removed from their positions. Although Stalin believed he was protecting the nation from disloyal officials, these actions weakened military leadership at a time when Europe was becoming increasingly unstable. Meanwhile, beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. Another powerful dictator was expanding his influence. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had transformed the country into a military state and openly spoke about expanding German territory. Across Europe, governments watched with growing concern as Nazi Germany grew stronger year after year. Despite their ideological differences, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August 1939. The agreement shocked much of the world because communism and Nazism were bitter rivals. Officially, the pact promised that neither country would attack the other. Secret provisions also divided parts of Eastern Europe into separate spheres of influence. For Stalin, the agreement bought valuable time. He believed the Soviet Union needed additional years to strengthen its industries and military before facing another major war. However, this period of peace would not last long. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the beginning of World War II in Europe. Within weeks, Soviet forces also entered eastern Poland under the terms of the agreement. Across the continent, the conflict spread rapidly. Although Stalin hoped to avoid direct war with Germany, Adolf Hitler had very different plans. In the early morning of June 20, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. More than 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border along a massive front stretching hundreds of miles. The invasion caught Soviet forces by surprise. Despite earlier intelligence reports suggesting that Germany was preparing for war, entire Soviet divisions were surrounded during the opening weeks of the campaign. Thousands of tanks and aircraft were destroyed. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured or killed as German forces advanced deeper into Soviet territory. For the first time since taking power, Joseph Stalin faced a crisis unlike anything he had experienced before. The future of the Soviet Union now depended not on political strategy alone, but on survival itself.